Hello, in the next couple of videos, we're going to discuss two things. We're going to discuss the reasons why some Americans embraced imperialism at the end of the 19th century and why some Americans rejected imperialism during the same period. This video is going to talk about those Americans who embraced imperialism. At first, it sounds a little strange. The United States came into being as a colony that was escaping an imperial empire, the British Empire. But at the same time, the United States had always kind of been imperialist itself. Even if it didn't have overseas empires, it still was a rapidly expanding country, first taking territory west of the Appalachians, then taking territory south in Florida, then the Southwest, moving into Oregon. So from sea to sea, manifest destiny. And so we'd always kind of behaved in an imperialist way, but we really didn't establish an overseas empire until the late 19th century. In fact, our first attempt to do that, our first overseas territory, was Alaska in 1867, and they made fun of it. They called it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. Now, it wasn't for another 50 years when they discovered gold there that they thought, well, maybe this was a good thing. But towards the end of the 19th century, things began to change. A couple different reasons for that, mostly dealing with industrialization and envy of Europe. First, let's talk about industrialization. We were producing so many things in America, and we were producing them cheap, we were producing them fast through our factory system, through the American system. We needed a market for those places, and Europe really wasn't that interested. On the other hand, we were convinced that if we could just get our boats to China, that those billion people over there just wanted our stuff. But how are we going to get there? Well, in order to exploit the Asia and particularly the China market, there were some things that had to happen. And one of the most influential persons during this time period was a guy by the name of Alfred Thayer Mann. Alfred Thayer Mann was a friend of President Roosevelt, and he was a history teacher at the Naval Academy and the American War College. And he was a firm believer in the power of navies. And he wrote a really influential book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And in it, he argued that the great nations of the world used their naval power as a way of extending their national presence or their national will. And if you think about it, this makes sense. It's very difficult for an army to be an international or global presence because you have to maintain them, whereas a ship, you can send to a port in some country, some foreign country, show off your flag a little bit, and then they move on to the next port. So you don't have to maintain them in quite the same way. Plus, armies are difficult to move, especially if you don't have a navy. And so this becomes a two-way way of establishing this. President Roosevelt is going to fully embrace this idea. He's going to expand the United States Navy. And he's even going to go so far as to build so many battleships that he's going to take some of them. He's going to paint them white, call them the Great White Fleet, and send them all the way around the world just to prove to the rest of the world that America is strong enough and has a navy that is so powerful that we can send a dozen ships all around the world just to say hi and still have plenty of navy to protect our own interests back home. Well, what Alfred Thayer Mann is going to argue in his book, in addition to the expansion of naval power, is that navies provide protection for merchants. And that as we begin exploiting the Asia trade, that we needed a strong U.S. Navy to protect those ships from pirates. Piracy is still alive. It's the 21st century, and pirates are still out there. And so we needed these naval stations, these navy, to do that. And in order for these navies to be successful, we needed to acquire islands in the Pacific Ocean as coaling stations. You see, whenever your ship is leaving, say, California, and they're going to China, then they can either fill up their cargo bays with coal so they can move their ship, or they can fill it up with cargo to sell. Well, of course, we wanted to fill it with cargo. That's the purpose of a merchant ship. And in the case of a warship, you can either fill up this warship with coal so you can move the ship, or you can fill it up with bullets so that you can actually do something with this warship. So we needed coaling stations. And so some of the coaling stations that he mentions are the Sandwich Islands, what we call Hawaii, the Kingdom of Hawaii, that we needed to establish good relations with the Kingdom of Hawaii so that we could build a naval station, say maybe in Pearl Harbor. Another place is the Philippines, which that's the front door to Asia, and whoever controls the Philippines controls a lot of the Asian trade. And then he also advocated for some other places. For example, there's an island about midway between Hawaii and the Philippines, and this island gives the name Midway. And so some of these islands are going to be acquired by the United States as coaling stations. They're got gas stations for boats and for ships. All right. And so this is going to be an important part. And of course, the more you have these coaling stations, then again, you need to have a military presence to protect U.S. interests in that area. And so that's going to expand that imperialism in that area. We're going to either take islands or lease islands from the Solomon Islands, from Tahiti, from all these different Micronesia kingdoms and places like this all across the Pacific. At the same time that he's advocating expanding imperialism for economic and for military reasons, there's other people for more social reasons. There was this idea called the white man's burden. The white man's burden was advocated by a British poet by the name of Rupert Kipling, who actually wrote a book about a poem called The White Man's Burden. And the gist of it is that white people, by virtue of having the most advanced culture, the most democratic culture, had an obligation to take that culture to the less advanced people of the world, the less technological, the less democratic people of the world, and to show them how countries should be run and how technology should be administered and how people should be educated. In other words, we're right, and so we had a virtue, we had a responsibility to share that information with the rest of the lesser developed or the undeveloped parts of the world. And the United States was going to be focusing on the Pacific area. England, by the way, is going to use this same attitude, by the way, to conquer Africa. And they're going to use this attitude to conquer India, or to at least to justify it to certain people who were concerned how we were treating the native people. And then lastly, going back to economics, was the idea of resources. There was a concern in the United States that we were going to destroy our own country by strip mining or by deforestation. And so they were beginning to set aside huge tracts of land in the West as national reserves, national parks, national forests, to preserve them for future generations. Well, we were a rapidly industrializing country. We needed a place not only for the markets for our manufactured goods, but we also needed a place to get those raw materials back to the United States so that we could avoid destroying our own country. We could instead destroy those countries. And so the quest for markets, but also the quest for raw materials, is going to push the United States into this imperialism. And a good example of this is going to be Hawaii. The Kingdom of Hawaii was an independent kingdom for a very long time, for centuries. And the United States they were first starting with missionaries and then later planters, plantation owners, that began moving into Hawaii. And the United States wanted Hawaii's sugar and their pineapples, so for our own consumption in the United States. So here we have that raw materials, right? Plus, we wanted to be able to sell our manufactured goods to the people of Hawaii. So there's our market. Furthermore, it's a strategically located. Whoever controls Hawaii has a distinct strategic advantage for controlling the Pacific Rim. And so we wanted Pearl Harbor or some other area in the Hawaiian Islands as a coaling station for our ships heading to China. So in the 1890s, when there's going to be a revolution in there's going to be a revolution in Hawaii. The revolution is going to be started primarily by American farmers who want access to American markets for their pineapples and for their sugar. See, the United States had a sugar tariff. you had to pay an extra tax to move your sugar into the United States. But if Hawaii was part of the United States as a territory, then we wouldn't have to pay the tax. And so they started a revolution, overthrew the Queen, in the hopes that the United States would annex Hawaii as a territory. Unfortunately, in the early 1890s, there were still a lot of people that were nervous about imperialism, and so that didn't happen right away. But by the end of the 1890s, there was enough people that were like, you know what, imperialism's a good thing. We can be like Europe. We can be a great nation. We can be a global power. We can be awesome and wonderful. And look, Hawaii wants to be part of us anyway. So even though it may have been 6 years later, the United States will eventually annex Hawaii so that they have that strategic naval position. So in the annexation of Hawaii, we see all of the things coming together for the reasons why Americans supported imperialism. Access to markets, access to raw materials, access to coaling stations to support a growing nation, a growing navy. All right. In our other video, we're going to find out that not everybody was supportive of imperialism, and we'll talk about the reasons why then. Until then, have a great day.